Good morning and welcome everyone. The ULT in Bethesda at 4865 Cordell Avenue, Suite 230, has a meeting at 11 a.m. every Sunday morning, followed by a discussion of the Bhagavad Gita on the first and third Sundays. The Theosophical movement, which has brought out new ideas to the world because they had gone underground for a while, has disseminated three fundamental propositions which are based on truth and the workings of the universe is based on these truths, has also enabled the students of Theosophy to perceive in themselves and come to the understanding of these three fundamentals, which is that there is a law in the universe that is not based on human law, and its workings are seen in karma and reincarnation, which enables us to go from life to life in correcting our errors and obtaining knowledge towards emancipation of the soul. And it is stated that the consciousness of the humanity at this stage is developed to the degree that we're still enmeshed, so to speak, in lower mind and our passions and desires, which lead us to face the environment we live in from that perspective. But when this lower personality becomes sensitive to the workings of the higher aspirations in himself, then it puts itself in accordance with the higher mind or the soul, enabling it to work for humanity in sacrifice to all. Today's talk will address the true and false personality, and the reading is from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 5. Renunciation of action and devotion through action are both means of final emancipation, but of these two, devotion through action is better than renunciation. He is considered to be an ascetic who seeks nothing and nothing rejects, being free from the influence of the pairs of opposites, that is to say, pleasure and pain, cold and heat, so forth. Of those of mighty arms, without trouble, he is released from the bonds forged by action. Children only, and not the wise, speak of renunciation of action and of right performance of action as being different. He who perfectly practices the one receives the fruits of both, and the place is nirvana, emancipation, which is gained by the renouncer of action, is also attained by him who is devoted in action. That man seeth with clear sight, who seeth that the Sankhya and the Yoga doctrines are identical. But to attain to true renunciation of action without devotion through action is difficult, of the almighty arms, while the devotee who is engaged in the right practice of his duties approacheth the Supreme Spirit in no long time. The man of purified heart, having his body fully controlled, his senses restrained, and for whom the only self is the self of all creatures, is not tainted, although performing actions. The devotee who knows the divine truth thinketh, I'm doing nothing in seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, even when speaking, letting go or taking, opening or closing his eyes, he saith, the senses and organs move by natural impulse to their appropriate objects. Whoever in acting dedicates his actions to the Supreme Spirit and puts aside all selfish interest in their result is untouched by sin, even as the leaf of the lotus is unaffected by the waters. The truly devoted, for the purification of the heart, perform actions with their bodies, their minds, their understanding, and their senses, putting away all self-interest. The man who is devoted and not attached to the fruit of his actions obtains tranquility, whilst he who, through desire, has attachment for the fruit of action is bound down thereby. The self-restrained sage, having with his heart renounced all actions, dwells at rest in the nine-gate city of his abode, neither acting nor causing to act. And now today's talk. True and false personality.
Thank you, friends. Welcome to the United Lodge of Theosophists. Today's topic is true and false personality, and it comes from a discussion in 5 years of Theosophy. We often make a distinction between personality and individuality, which we will highlight on. But the very first point to establish is that we could say the most basic distinction we can make is between spirit and matter, the two poles of embodied existence, the duality that we experience in everything in life. We know spirit is immortal, being divine. And matter is perishable. It exists for a time, in time, but eventually time passes, things change, and that vibrational energy expends itself and it ends. So we could say in matter are our senses, our understanding, our thirst for life, and the Sanskrit word for this is prakriti, and this, purusha, spirit and matter. So this is, whether we do it in English, we can still find these ideas in ancient Hindu. We can find them in pretty much any religious, mystical tradition. The article suggests that we perhaps regard spirit as within us, in the sense that we're on the material plane, and therefore matter and the senses play such a big role. It tends to eclipse spirit on this level, on the plane of the terrestrial day-to-day life. And unless we make an effort to get in touch with that inner true spiritual part of us, it's possible to go through one's life without really thinking too much about it. But for those of us who have questions and who are interested and want to understand who we really are and what the purpose of life is, there's some useful ideas here in this. So we could regard spirit as that which has to be sort of resuscitated consciously. It's not like it's not there. It's there. It's a matter of removing the dark clouds of matter that surround what is essentially our true inner core, that which is identical in all beings. It doesn't differ from individual to individual. It's omniscient, it's omnipotent, it always knows the right thing to do at the right time, And we get glimpses of it through intuition, and sometimes we're able to listen to that voice inside, and sometimes we don't. And then something happens, and we say, oh, I had that little voice, and I didn't listen to it. So those can be glimmers. And we can't ignore the fact as we look at our whole life scientifically, that's a phenomenon that we can't just exclude from all the effects we see in life. We can't say, well, we're just going to study this and we'll forget about those. Those don't really mean anything. We have to look at the whole picture in order to be truly scientific about understanding spirituality. So we're talking about consciously resuscitating this spiritual nature that's been obscured, that immortality. But know that it is inmost, it's central, it's inseparable from all phenomenon. It's not just in individuals, it's in every point in space, in every being, in every particle, constantly supported, surrounded by it. And it is the underlying principle of all life, of all existence, because we all come from one and the same source. So consciousness centered in our personality, in our who we are in this life, Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith, is a consciousness based on the world of senses, and it can fail to attach itself to spirit, to the higher principles, if it refuses to admit that there is this spiritual nature. It's like turning away from it. And by refusing to admit, by not aspiring in that direction, there is no guarantee of immortality. Well, what is immortality? I mean, we're dual in the sense that we've allowed ourselves to be. But it is possible to link the two, to make a marriage between our terrestrial personality and that which is immortal, by aspiring to understand spirit, by effecting actions for the benefit not just of ourselves but for all. The two can be brought together in a mystical marriage, so to speak, and then those good deeds, those high aspirations, those caring for others, which is based on the law that we're all one, that the universe will support, then that experience becomes permanently wedded to the reincarnating ego, becomes part of its experience, and brings it from life to life. That's how we come back with certain tendencies, certain karma, that we end up in certain circumstances and lead us down a certain road. So this is why many sacred scriptures, regardless of the tradition, say things like, we have to die to ourselves. Give up thy life if thou wouldst live. Rebirth in spirit. And what it means is to awaken, to resuscitate, to find within ourselves, to uncover that who we really are. And if we fail to do so, if we don't put ourselves within the purview of that spirit, if we don't acknowledge it, then it can't really aid us. It's like if you need food and you don't go to the grocery store, you're not going to get any food. You have to sort of apply yourself in that direction. Because we are always making choices, using our mind, thinking, we're mind beings, and we're self-conscious, self-reflective choice makers, there's an element of having to bring ourselves to a real feeling and acknowledgement of this as a fact, not just as a speculation. the secret doctrine says in the ancient source that this wisdom was passed down through generations of adepts, perfected men, who over lifetimes tested, checked, and verified the experiences of all, and only those that corresponded, that were similar, were regarded as true and passed on. So this transmission of theosophy through Madame Blavatsky and William Q. Judge is a portion of that wisdom, and the more we investigate it, the more we can see the consistency with that overarching theme, and that points to the fact that this ancient source is within us. We're not going to find it without in the world. We have to take that journey within. So likewise, if we emulate that, if we put ourselves within their purview and admit that there are perfected beings, those who have gone on before us, who have revealed the secrets of nature, who have lived on behalf of others, then we are sort of modeling, acting in the method that they have. And then all our experiences we can test, check, and verify against our understanding. What this is really called, once someone embarks upon this path assiduously, is called a mystic death, and a birth, which is a rebirth in spirit, and it's a profound mystic teaching that many religious traditions have. And it shows the difference between ordinary religious feeling and true spiritual insight and intuition. Because the more we rely and place our actions and our trust in that spiritual nature, the more it'll come to our aid, and the more our intuition will be awakened. Sort of like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the easier it works for you. Sometimes when we go over our day, so many things happen. Sometimes the most determinative experiences that change our lives, that really ultimately end up speaking to us at a deep level, seem at the time insignificant. And we could probably all find an example of that in our lives. But to pay attention to everything, that everything's under the purview of law, unity, and karma, and therefore even the most trifling experience has some meaning there for us. We have to learn to see the meaning in all. We don't want to overanalyze it too much, but just be aware of that. So this jump doesn't happen instantaneously. We have to enlarge our views to encompass a sort of progress of the soul. And the idea, like I said, must be made real and not just a philosophical abstraction. We have to ponder and carefully examine, test things out for ourselves, like the methods of the adepts, and ultimately we end up at the science of spirituality. And this is when someone who has embarked upon this path for many lifetimes and ultimately decides to dedicate their entire life to it, become a disciple, and meet a teacher, they're truly entering the science of spirituality, and they apply mental methods very specifically so that they can remove the illusion that this is real, and by degrees come to a conscious realization of spirit. And at some point the teacher and the student meet. But for the most of us who are still questioning and needing to get to the point of purifying ourselves and thinking broadly and trusting in the spiritual core that we are, moving in that direction is our best mistake. Is our best bet. I was just saying mistake because the spiritualists in HPB's time sort of did make this mistake. They regarded the personality and everything in the day-to-day world, its manifestations, its delights, its activities, as something that would perpetuate and that they could contact it, loved ones post-mortem. And Theosophy explains that personality existed in time, but it's perishable and it will eventually return to its source, and that's not what's real in us. What's real in us is that permanent individuality, the spirit that reincarnates from life to life. Theosophy maintains that since the personality and all the details along with our life dies with the body, unless it is synthesized and brought to bear towards the recognition of a universal unity, unless it's acted out on behalf of all, because we're all one, it can't last. So this is our choice. All thought, all action has a vibration. It has an energy behind it. We might feel strongly or act strongly about something, or we might do something with very little thought. And this vibrational wavelength, the energy, indicates how long it can persist. So the energy of the lower consciousness in general, because it can't harmonize with the all, if it's for personal, selfish, selfish in terms of like the self of Mr. Brown or Mrs. Smith. In that way, if it's selfish, it's egocentric, it's going to, that vibratory rate is not going to be able to ultimately to harmonize, and therefore it will come to an end. The vibrational wavelength of energy that is aspired or given on behalf of all is synonymous with the basis of the universe, and therefore it can persist. And that's why there's talk about, we have to die to ourselves to be reborn in spirit. Have to give up loosen those bonds of ego to open up to others. So this brings about this idea of a circle, and how we have a circle of thought and how we can enlarge it to encompass other beings. We may be centered on our personality as real, but we must push the circumference out, keep pushing it out, so that it includes more and more beings, more and more concepts. So that's a sort of a graphic to help us understand. One way to do this is to keep formulating ideas about the Mahatmas, about perfected beings, to sort of put ourselves in a vibrational match with them, because they are constantly, as Theosophy says, guiding and benefiting humanity by ceaselessly, giving out beneficent thought patterns and energy to attract those who are thinking along the same lines. So it's possible to sort of hook up with that energy if we allow ourselves to do that. keep formulating ideas about them, reinforce their existence. Now, people have done this during their life. Individuals have, and they have ceased to be personal and become more individual, more encompassing of others, and they identify themselves with the whole of humanity. And so far as they have done that, we've esteemed them as great beings, like Gandhi, who is, so willing to sacrifice his own, personal ends for a greater good. So there are those examples who have gone ahead. There are examples of those people who are doing it actively, and they're devotees to humanity. In them, a certain change or conversion has been effected, and they've become representative men and women of the all, citizens of the world, of all of humanity, not particular to a nation or just a community, although that's a great place to start. The idea is that we keep enlarging it. And what happens when people do this and their interests become enlarged, the personal interests end up shrinking. And in accordance with, people like that, we accord them respect, admiration, love. We think of them as, like Mother Teresa. We have great respect for what she's done. And that doesn't mean we have to be Mother Teresa in this life. We have to still do our duty. We have to do what's in front of us because that's where our karma has led us. But to attempt to enlarge that circle in the process. We can also look at it as a ladder, if you prefer a different graphic that helps you visualize. And every visualization that we use is helpful, and eventually it'll get replaced with another one. It's just a tool. It's not something to, get stuck on. So the ascending scale would be the self and the family and the community and the state and the whole world, all beings, animal, plant. Theosophy even says that rocks and minerals have life. They don't express self-consciousness, but there is life within them in that form, experiencing that state for its development. And the more we move in this upward direction towards spirit, upward or inward, the more we send out those thoughts, it becomes part of our sphere. We affect all the matter and all the other beings we come in contact with. So one person can be an inspiration to others and can help. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump, so to speak. But climbing the ladder can be difficult. The Voice of the Silence talks about the paramitas and the different gates, and you have to be solid on your first step before you take the next. You can't rush into it or disaster will occur, because with spirituality you're dealing with very powerful laws and forces. So you have to think it through and be sincere and be honest with oneself. Such successive transitions allow the individual to depend more and more on spirit, and eventually the personality, kind of shrinks and becomes, it doesn't exist. It doesn't go away. It doesn't destruct. We don't get rid of it. It just becomes a tool. It becomes a tool we can use to interact with others as part of the greater mission of becoming one with the all. So as this happens, all the particulars, all the partial, all the little atomic bits of our life become sort of transformed and synthesized. It's sort of like it's greater than the sum of its parts. If you're baking something, you have all these ingredients. By themselves, they don't do anything. But when you put them together and you apply flame or heat, like the flame of spiritual knowledge, something new is created that you could never get any other way. So we're not trying to get rid of the personality, but we're going to say it's false because it's only temporary. It lasts for the length of one lifetime. And Theosophy says we reincarnate from age to age and experience many bodies, many experiences in our soul growth, development, and evolution. So eventually we become a divine personality. And it's interesting the idea of a divine personality. Did I get that right? Personality. Like the archetypes of all the myths, the Norse myths, the Greek myths, the Hindu myths. There's all these characters. They're divine, but they still have like a personality. And it seems to this student that the personality is sort of indicative of their role in assisting nature, or their role as an aspect of the universe that we're trying to understand. And then eventually we move from divine personality to complete association with the all. So these are successive transitions. But it's interesting, the idea of a divine personality versus universal. So this process is going on all the time. We don't have to worry if we make a mistake. There's always a new day. We always get to try again. We just do the best we can. We don't have to put undue pressure on ourselves. But gradually over time, if we persist, we'll see that our limitations start to loosen, our interests start to widen, and it's a process of continual betterment. And then once one becomes so devoted to it that they are ready for a higher level of existence and they need a teacher to guide them, then the science really comes in of precisely how to think, how to meditate, how to apply vibrational energy in a certain way, and that becomes the science of spirituality, and we can move in that direction. I had a quote to read. When the spiritual state is arrived at, let's see, do I have the right one? Page 34. I and mine, which belong to the finite mind, cease, and the soul, living in the universum and participating in infinity with, for all intents and purposes, God, the all, manifests in its infinite state. So it's possible for that to happen here on this plane, and that's why that would explain some of the so-called miracles that some great teachers, Mahatmas, are able to effect, is that they're not limited by, they have complete knowledge. We're limited by our current understanding of the laws of physics and the laws of spirituality, and they, having mastered it, becoming one with it, they understand all the underlying principles. There is a point to be made, though, and there's some articles in Theosophy on faith, about avoiding blind faith, about having thought, about thinking it through. But it seems to this student, faith could be applied in that immortality can't be demonstrated phenomenally in the phenomenal world. But science has shown us, and maybe our intuition tells us, that we can go back as far as we can, but it's almost impossible to find a beginning because everything comes from a previous cause. And at a certain point it becomes profitless to do so because we're so abstracted, we're not in the here and now. But I don't know, trust or faith that the immortality can't be demonstrated on the physical plane, but yet it upholds the whole thing. And when we get to that point, we participate in infinity, and we can manifest it in time, out of time. There's another quote, I'll look real quick. So when a being in the course of this process is able to move along this path and consciousness is raised to a higher level, the phenomenal world, which is normally upheld in the lower consciousness, it disappears and it takes on a more interior, a more living and significant form. So we can say maybe they experience things differently. They don't experience the mundane plane with a sense of finality or limitation that we do. In striving towards universal consciousness, our sense and impatience with our limitations, and this was a really interesting point, it said, points to the guarantee that they aren't final. There's some part of us that knows, I'm not going to be limited by this. There's got to be a way through this. And that's maybe an intuition that those limitations are not final and insuperable. There is a way through the maze. It may be not, sometimes instead of thinking about a problem, it's best to think about something else. And then it comes to you after sleep or after engaging in some other activity. So this might be an analogy, but our sense that the limitations can be surmounted shows us that there is a way if we look within. And there is, let me find at the very end, the portrait of a Mahatma. Through and above this troubled atmosphere, I see a being, pure, passionless, rightly measuring the proportions and relations of things, for whom there is, properly speaking, no present, no past, with its phantasms, falsities, and half-truths, who has nothing personal in the sense of being opposed to the whole of related personalities, who sees the truth rather than struggles logically toward it, and truth of which I can at present form no conception, whose activities are unimpeded by intellectual doubt, unperverted by moral depravity, and who is indifferent to the results, because he has not to guide his conduct by calculation of them. Instead of using the mind to calculate every little move, or by any estimate of their value. I look up to him with awe, because in being passionless, he sometimes seems to me to be without love, yet I know that this is not so. only that the love is diffused by its range and elevated in abstraction beyond my gaze and comprehension. And I see in this being my ideal, my higher, my only true, in a word, my immortal self. Okay. So we'd like to open it up for questions, comments, clarifications.
Just perhaps I should bring this out. This you put up there. This is just belonging to this field operation, right? Our world. But when you take it backwards to the Supreme, which is Parabrahm, and Mula Prakriti, the Secret Doctrine does make the statement that neither one of them are ever created, that the primordial substance is, but that its form in the physical world gets perished and rechanged, right?
Yeah, the student said that in the Secret Doctrine it says that beyond this level, beyond duality, there is that which ever is, was, and ever will be, and that the universe or duality is a periodical manifestation, and that's an excellent point to make, because there is the universal, there is surpassing this duality. That's where the one life really is. But just for purposes of discussing how our nature can conflict with each other, that sort of war between the higher and the lower that we're engaged in from day to day. There's also, 7 principles in man, and one is mind. And it occurred to the student to discuss the 7 principles, but just decided instead to keep it just a little simpler. But mind is really what we're dealing with here. And we could say that this is the lower mind, and this is the higher mind. And mind is dual when it encounters the material world. It's sort of like a ray that splits, and that's what, as human beings, we're struggling to understand and to learn and to master. We've mastered, Madame Blavatsky says, desires, but we have not mastered mind, how to direct those, how to use those for the benefit of all. So using them for ourselves tends towards the perishable, that which is going to die with the body and that life, and the higher, which becomes a permanent part of the reincarnating ego and lives on, and of course helps to raise up all other matter and beings that are touched by it. And they don't have to be like local. Your thought expands, across the universe, and it's like a huge matrix. And the power of thought is really way beyond what we really think of it, and we contact others who are thinking along the same lines. That's that sort of vibrational match that was mentioned earlier. So thinking about Mahatmas puts us in line with others thinking about them, puts us in line with their beneficent ideation, and it's like, I guess, like the analogy of going to the grocery store. Yes?
You raised a number of profound points, but in thinking back over my life, I've spent many years in school, many years in church, and it doesn't give me a whole lot to hang my hat on. How do I prove these things to myself? Laws of nature,
Okay, the comment is having grown up in the school system and in church where these things aren't talked about or discussed, one can find oneself at sea as to how to could we say believe in it, enact it,
how to prove it to myself and believe.
how to prove it to oneself? Well, it seems to this student, by being scientific about observing one's actions, one's intentions, the results of those, but one would have to do it over more than just a week. It would have to be over time, because karma doesn't precipitate immediately. We are under the illusion of time, and the result is wrapped up in the cause, but to us we experience it perhaps over time. So it seems to this student the guidance would be to when one hears something like this, sit with it. How does it sound? Test it, check it, and verify it in all parts of one's life. Don't take it on anybody's word. And that helps one to trust and rely on oneself, one's intuition. There's no magic secret, no quicksilver bullet.
So no help from out there to start with.
Well, except that there's other people doing this. You're not the only one questioning, thinking about these ideas. Get together and talk about them. The more people that are talking, ideating, thinking about these things, to call upon these ideas and to think about them can open up centers within ourselves where the answers will come.
It unfolds from within.
From within, without. Like I said. Yes?
I was just thinking about the question that Herb raised, and looking at it from a standpoint of one growing up in public schools or private schools, and church institutions, whether they be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever. It seems that it takes a real shift in conceptually, paradigm shift, and being able to prove this, to be able to find the answers, to be able to use this as some type of security, unless you apply the knowledge, unless you are willing to understand that the information some of the answers are in the information that is out there that leads you to question and answer based on application of the knowledge or analysis, enlightenment through the knowledge. For instance, you said that this difference in spirit and matter in our plane of existence, is dealing with the lower self or the lower mind and a reconciliation with the higher mind. Well, that's a big shift in thinking, because when you think in terms of society, schools, religious institutions, it is even though it is a push or draw towards materialism, even though there's some lip service to spirituality, the actual practice is more.
It's harder.
It's harder. It's mind, body, consciousness. Strictly, it's the lower mind. It's the material existence and understanding, how to.
You're saying it's easy to talk the talk, but not to walk the walk.
Well, to get the security that Herb is talking about, so that you can rely and depend upon, you know, this for, and be sure that you're along the right path, is you have to pursue a path of realization, self-realization, and applying the knowledge through that process of self-realization.
Yeah, Theosophy says that at the man stage, we have to rely on self-induced and self-devised efforts. Doesn't mean we're all alone in this. We have the, fundamental underpinnings of all knowledge, omniscience, omnipotence, that is our true nature. But we also are in the company of others doing the same thing. And although this looks like a split, I mean, it's really for purposes of discussion today. But ultimately, it's really an interblending. It's not such a cut and dried thing. Nothing is totally, good or totally bad. There's always a mixture in any decision you make. There's probably going to be, some good, some bad. And the idea is, in Theosophy, is to have the intention and the motivation, the aspiration to do one's best and leave the results to law. That doesn't mean don't care about what happens, but to realize that on this plane there is a mixture, and we can do the best we can, and progressively, through observing the process, through applying it, through continuing to return to these ideas, we can gradually lift ourselves up by our bootstraps and see things from a different perspective. Sandra, and then...
I was also thinking about Earth's question, how do you know, how do you actually assured of this? And I thought that the answer was in your talk. And one of basically being silent, stopping the chain of logical thinking. Because it's almost like we're starting in a logical pattern of thinking, and it's like a mesh. We cannot get out of it. The more we think, the more we move in the same pattern. And if you can stop all of that thinking and remain silent, your mind almost will reprogram and suddenly start making new connections. Or in that silence, point. You'll get that feedback from your higher mind.
So the comment is to rely on silence, not always on thinking. That thinking is a self-reproductive chain, and it can't always give us the answer. We have to stop it and let other parts of our nature bring to bear on it, and maybe through silence that reassurance or that answer or will come. That's an excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah, it's similar to Sandra's comment. There has to be a shift in the consciousness, that if we identify with the lower, that's where we're going to remain. The shift has to be identification with the higher. If you are truly that, then you really have to act that you are that. Until that change occurs, the truth cannot be proven, because it is internal to each human being. And when you see that concentration, which is silence, that's when you get it. It will show it to you. It does show it to you. And I'm not saying that it shows itself to you. I'm saying that little events occur to prove that you're on the right path.
Seeming coincidences, things that, synchronicity, things that seem to fit together.
In your life suddenly to help.
When you need them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And things fall into place.
Yeah, that's it.
Things fall into place when when you're in proper alignment and understanding, and by being silent or by concentrating, you put yourself in a position of being able to have things fall into place. And that's what really matters. And that's how you really know. I mean, is when things start falling, either mentally or physically, either inwardly or outwardly, into place, into order. The order that's already existing that you've been, up to this point, really unaware of.
Yeah, because our spiritual nature, being one with the all, knows our highest aspirations more than we consciously do. They're the greater part of us exists, I don't want to say without, it's within really. We're just unaware of it because of training, because of whatever, we've cut ourselves off from it. Okay, well thank you so much for your questions and comments. And next week is, I think it's the meta geometry.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. Metageometry.
Okay, and there is a international theosophical conference.
In August.
August 8, I believe.
This says August 9 through 12. And it's called Karmic Cycles, Wheels of Spiritual Growth, and it's going to be in Wheaton, Illinois, near Chicago, and we have flyers about that. And is there a study class today in the Gita?
Yes.
Study class following a break. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.